First Vocal Plane Podcast with Sean and Rooster.
All right. I think that's the first time Kurt hasn't talked.
I think we pulled that off without a hitch this time.
Hey guys, welcome to an impromptu episode 33 of the First Vocal Plane Podcast, where we are joined by a couple very special guests. One of them I've been trying to get on the show since we started, and who has arguably the greatest name in the history of names, Mr. Wrangler Hamm from the Saskatchewan Trappers Association. How are you, Wrangler?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good.
Peachy keen, trying to stay warm.
Great.
Kidding.
Yeah, on days like today, I could imagine. Nowhere better than inside.
Well, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, we are joined by, I know her as Sophie, the Fox lady. Hey, Sophie, you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having both of us on the show. So I'm Sophie. I'm a PhD student at University of California, Davis. So 65 and sunny here today. And I work in a research lab called the Mammalian Ecology and Conservation Unit, and we focus largely on conservation of mammal populations, and we use genetic techniques to study sort of historical processes that influence where populations are today, and then as well as monitoring populations, some populations that are at risk, some populations that are game species that the state wants to keep track of for hunter-harvest quotas. So we have, a pretty wide breadth of taxa that our lab works with, but I am the fox lady. And so I study both red and gray foxes, but what I think we're going to be talking about mostly today is red foxes. I study, I'll get into it a little bit, but red foxes in North America, mostly Western North America, and sort of different populations and sort of what's gone on with them in the past. And there's some interesting plot twists in there that I'll share as well. So.
Okay, nice. Well, let's kind of dive into this. So why have you started your PhD study? I venture to say this is a thesis, or what is it for? If you want to give that up, like how did you get into foxes? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did my undergrad research in ecology and evolution, and then had a couple of different jobs after undergrad. Knew I wanted to do wildlife conservation research and was pretty sure I wanted to focus on mammals. And so I bounced around, did a couple different jobs. I worked with our California State Fish and Wildlife Department doing some deer and mountain lion work. And then I worked for the U.S. Forest Service up in Yosemite National Park area studying fishers, which are a small, mesocarnivore, also a fur bearer.
Awesome animals.
Yeah, they're really cool. They're actually my favorite animal for sure. So,
nice.
Yeah. And that was really great. And then I took a job at UC Davis studying a red fox population that's only found in the Sacramento Valley, so the northern Central Valley of California. And it was really cool. It was a camera survey. So we actually got the first census, estimated census population size of this subspecies of red fox. And it also has an interesting history where it, prior to 2007, it was actually thought to be a non-native population. And so using the genetics, it was actually our research lab, my advisor, Ben Sachs, who found that it actually was a native red fox subspecies that was closely related to the other Western red foxes that we know about.
Wow. Exciting. Wow, cool. Okay.
I didn't know foxes went that deep.
You don't, me either.
Yeah, they're I've spent so many times trying to tease apart the true history of red foxes in North America. And so that kind of spurred me reaching out to Wrangler and trying to put some more of the puzzle pieces together. So
yeah, they never get the limelight like coyotes do. Coyotes are so resilient and adaptive, right? And they always seem to get much more. Those and wolves always seem to get much more play than foxes do. I love foxes.
Yeah, they're awesome. I mean,
yeah.
so in California, we have this one population of red fox in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and it's also found in the Southern Cascades in Oregon. And that subspecies actually gets a lot of sort of attention in our state, just because it's very, very small. And actually, they also thought that it was extirpated. And in 2010, someone caught a photo of one on a camera. And so since then, we've been studying that population as well. Yeah, it's really interesting working in California with foxes, because we did a lot of sort of community outreach, because folks were letting us put cameras on their properties and stuff. And people really love the foxes, and they really don't like the coyotes.
I think that's a pretty common sentiment.
Pretty universal sentiment, if you will.
Yeah.
Unless foxes get into your chicken coop, and then
it's surprising. Even then, like most people, because they'll in the valley, they'll den, in people's backyards, and they sort of use humans as a refugia, keeps the pups safe from coyotes. Yeah. And people are pretty tolerant of them. They'll lose their chickens, but they're like, yeah, but the foxes are so cute. And
foxes do what foxes do.
Well, and in terms of canines, like foxes are a beautiful animal. They really are, especially red foxes. I think just looking at the contrast with their white tip tail and then they're just gorgeous. And it's a for me, considering I don't have a line, it's a shame I can't have one of those as a trophy or they're just gorgeous animals. But anyway,
and personalities on them. At least what I've found, I've known, I think, 2 orphan foxes that farmers took care of. Mom got run over or whatever, and they are just wild with personality. It's crazy. They're hyper little animals, and they don't last long, and they're back out in the wild. And like, okay, thanks for all the grub. See you later.
They're pretty cute.
Yeah.
So, Sophie, how did you and Wrangler and the Sask Trappers Association hook up?
I guess we were kind of, it's always been this sort of sampling gap for us. Our research lab has done a lot of work over the years with red foxes, both on the East Coast and sort of in the Western montane regions. And I think what we're realizing as we start to put the pieces together is that we really want to be able to characterize the genetics of the red foxes. We've got like Alaska, and we've got the East Coast, and we've got some from the West, but we're really missing that whole band across Canada. And so it's actually been on my list for the last year or so to try and make that connection. And I thought about it and talked with my advisor, and said I should try to make this happen. And I knew when the trapping season was too, and it just got away from me a little bit. So I reached out a bit late, but I just, we work a lot with, like I said, the State Department, and also other organizations like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and California Deer Association. And so we know how powerful it can be to work with like hunters or trappers who are harvesting those animals, right? And we can just take a small sample, and it's so much valuable data for us. So those collaborations, they take time to foster, but they're really, really invaluable. So I just thought, hey, why don't I just reach out to some trappers associations and see if anybody's interested? And like I said, I'm always game to share the data and have chats like this. So far it's been really awesome.
Nice.
I think what's cool with projects like this is that A lot of people depict trappers as those folks who are out there just on the land and they're harvesting and whatever, but they really don't understand how, much drive we have to learn more about the species and actually do better for the habitat. And the only way we're going to do that is to work together on partnerships like this. And for us to do what we're doing right now and provide us a piece of sample that makes no impact on the overall return of our markets, why not? So it definitely adds to that added value.
Well, and especially if you're not affecting the livelihood of trappers who do this for a living, right? It's, like you said, you've reached out in the short amount of time, you've had 7 or so samples that are going to Sophie and her crew there, right? So, and
that's just myself being on the road. The market on the red fox right now in the global side of things, it's not that high, and that's what's heartbreaking even for myself. I probably take more time on my red fox than I do any of my other species because I just like to put them up and I want them to look beautiful as best as they can. So if it's not worth a whole bunch to sell, at least I can do is put another method to it, right? I can at least use that product to help a proposal or a project like this. If somebody needs a study for the skulls or whatever, by all means, we want to do this, So let's get in. And that's, I've been talking to the trappers out there and they're all just saying, yeah, why not? It's not that hard to do. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do now is to engage the trappers and say, one, we need those samples. And then how do we get those samples? And so I'm here today because I want to make sure that we can make it as easy as possible. And I've got a way to do it. I know it's going to work, but I need all the trappers to kick in and start doing it. So we'll make it happen, definitely.
Right on. Well, hopefully this show helps that. Now, so Sophia, sorry to cut you off from drinking your water there, but what is the study? Like, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, so essentially what the work that we've been doing, right, is we've got these, so kind of the evolutionary history, right, of the foxes. Half a million years ago, 500,000 years ago, so red foxes originated in Eurasia in the Middle East. And so then they sort of spread, to Europe and to Eastern Asia. And then about 500,000 years ago, they came over to North America. And so from there, foxes in Alaska, when the ice sheets shifted, they moved south. And so then they split into 2 different lineages. We got an Eastern and a Western. And so, like I mentioned before, my lab is mostly focused on the Western red fox populations. And they're very distinct, right? We know this about their evolutionary history, and they were isolated for a very long time, these Western red foxes, and they lived high up in the subalpine habitat, in the Rocky Mountains, the Cascades, and the Sierra Nevadas. And then what we see today when we're monitoring red foxes in the West is that we have a lot of foxes that sort of are not of that origin. And so, we do know a lot as well about the history of fur farming. And so we know that, fur farming originated on Prince Edward Island. Foxes, the source for that was eastern wild foxes, as well as some foxes from Alaska. And then, foxes from there were sort of populating fur farms all over North America. And so we have this population. So that's one possible source, right? So we have all these sort of red foxes that seem to be kind of like Eastern foxes, kind of like Alaskan foxes, but like maybe not quite exactly the same. And where did they come from? And now they're sort of in the lower elevation. We call it like the Intermountain West, right? So they're sort of in between all of these high elevation habitats in the Western US. And we're not entirely sure where they came from. And so what we're trying to figure out is, sure, maybe they were red foxes that were released from, fur farms that were historically there. But we also, what we seem to see is the montane population seemed to be expanding a bit in numbers. So they all went through pretty precipitous declines. And so now they seem to be growing a bit. And so we're wondering if that's all sort of interconnected, and possibly, there's actually gene flow and foxes, sort of genetic material from foxes in like Alberta and Saskatchewan, sort of the Great Plains, that's sort of facilitating that expansion. And so some of the genetic material that we're seeing that doesn't look like that, classic Western montane red fox, maybe it comes from fur farm foxes, but maybe it actually just comes from this like broader range expansion of foxes in the Great Plains.
Interesting. So for those of the uneducated, let's say, what is a fur farm?
Yeah, so fur farms, essentially they were establishments where foxes were taken from the wild and bred in captivity, and then the pelts were sold from the fur farms. And so they have a really interesting history. Again, they originated on Prince Edward Island in the late 1800s. And then, essentially from there it became really, really popular, right? Those silver foxes specifically.
Yeah.
And so they were selectively bred for these beautiful coat colors. The silver was a big one, but there are tons of really, really unique and beautiful red fox coat colors. And so, they would selectively breed them for these different coat colors, and then they would sell them at market or sell them to other fur farms who wanted to start their own breeding. The history is so interesting, and just the number of like large fur farms or like little mom and pop fur farms, or you'll talk to people who are like, oh yeah, I remember growing up, like up the road, this guy had like a fox farm. And so it's tough to keep track of it all, and there's so much information.
But that doesn't exist now, correct? Like it does? Oh, wow.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yep. So there are still quite a few fur farms that do exist today in the US and in Canada as well.
It's not as prevalent as it was in the past. Now you're going to see in Saskatchewan, if you talk to anybody in rural Saskatchewan from like the early 30s, 40s, 50s, you'll talk to somebody who will know someone who was raising mink or fox. Those are really the two species that were under the ranch section. So when you see marketable furs in the auction sales or in the private sales, it was either wild fur or ranch fur. And the ranch fur is what we're talking about right now. So ranch fox or ranch mink. And Saskatchewan, like, I don't know if there's anybody left that's still raising mink or ranch or fox for the fur markets. But Eastern Canada still has a few. And unfortunately, those markets have really turned down the dial on the values of them. And there's a whole nother story to that piece of it all. But we've seen a tremendous decline in that section of the fur industry. Big time. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm learning here too. So this is good. So okay. So
I got a question here. The silver foxes, are they a different subspecies altogether, or is it just a color phase of a red fox?
Yeah, so it's just a color phase. So,
it is.
Even in one population of foxes, you can have reds, you can have silvers, or you can have crosses. I believe are the three sort of common ones that we see in the wild in North America. So like in the Sierra Nevada population, you'll see all three color morphs. You'll see reds, crosses, and silvers. In the valley, we only see reds. So, maybe at one point there was the genetic variation there to have all three. And then they go through what we call a genetic bottleneck, right? It's sort of some sort of event that happens. It could be human, over hunting, overuse. It could be some other factor that causes their population to decline and get really, really small. And then just due to random chance, you can lose a lot of the genetic variation that exists. And so maybe some of the genetic variation that was lost was the genes that code for those different color morphs. And so now we only see reds in the valley.
Doug Rodenbush brings up a question that has kind of been on my mind too. Like I look around here my entire life, there hasn't been a great population of red foxes. You do see them a fair bit, but they're nothing like you'd see in a coyote population. Doug asks, how do the red foxes do with relocating if they need to repopulate an area where they've been decimated? Now, where I'm going, I guess, with what I had in mind is how resilient are they? They don't seem to put out great populations. It's almost like they're a little bit sensitive to their environment that doesn't allow heavy breeding.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and one that our lab is actually sort of grappling with right now with that Sierra Nevada red fox population, right? So they went through a super intense genetic bottleneck to the point where there were very few individuals, and the whole population was incredibly inbred. And so one of she's a postdoc in our lab now, Kate Quinn. She's just published a paper on some of this stuff, but essentially she was monitoring the population for several years, and there was no evidence of reproduction at all. So thinking the population was so inbred, it wasn't even able to reproduce anymore. And there was this sort of natural experiment, essentially, where we had two male red foxes that were from Nevada. So sort of that Intermountain population that I was talking about earlier that somehow made it into the population. We don't know exactly how, but presumably they migrated up there and immediately, paired up with two of the females and had pups. And so since then, we've been monitoring that population, and the population is actually growing now. So it sort of released them from this inbreeding depression potentially. But you have this other concern where, it can quickly return to inbreeding. And so what's going on now in California is folks are talking about whether something like a relocation would be valuable or helpful for that population that is still really in a very critical at-risk place. Or, it's like the trajectory could go up or it could just go back down. It kind of raises this question of, are all red foxes the same? Would this red fox do fine in this habitat and vice versa? And so it's kind of an age-old question with relocations is you do run the risk, right, of introducing some genetic material that's just not adapted to the environment you're relocating. Right. And that's, we're learning so much so quickly, especially in this genomic field, right? Like the technology and the ability to do computational research is accelerating so quickly. So I think we're trying to get at those things. We're trying to answer some of those questions, but it's tough. And there's always going to be something you maybe didn't account for, maybe didn't expect to happen. And so it's also so difficult because you sometimes get in this paralysis where you're like, I don't want to do any harm. So you just don't do anything. And then and then the population just blinks out like that. Because
I think
it's a delicate balance, right?
It is. There's a lot of variabilities at play as well, like based on from state to state to state versus provinces or Canada to the US. There's so many different variabilities that could make an impact on population. And here in Saskatchewan, predation is probably one of the larger sector of it. Like when you have high coyote populations, which we know our province is loaded with them, it does make a significant impact on the red fox population. Yeah. Well, as we've seen the market of the coyote climb, we've seen that it's been more effective on managing their overall numbers, which in return this year, I've noted a lot of trappers saying they've caught more red fox than they ever have in the past. So the numbers are higher. So is that a result of proper population management of the coyotes?
Well, adding to that, Wrangler, like I work in agriculture and I'm a lot in the field and well, not so much lately with COVID, but even when I was out with my escapades this spring or this fall and spring, I've seen a lot more red foxes and and that's just some Joe Blow, driving around in a truck. That's not, that's huge. That's awesome. I love that. So
you can also look at other things like habitat. And I'm not making a poke at agriculture on this one because I'm a rancher as well. But think of the volume of tree rows that we used to have, think of the volume of native grass and watersheds that we had that were a populace of mice and shrews and voles and the small subspecies that red fox lived on. And we know fox can adapt very well, but so can a coyote. And we know living down in suburbs and metropolitan areas, they're existing with human activity. But it's also
and not just existing, they're thriving, especially in the California Valley, where like almond agriculture has just exploded, and that takes up all the water in the valley. And but yet you're seeing fox populations start to grow because, like we were talking off air, they almost use humans as a shield in some cases, right?
Yeah.
Sophie, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So that high elevation montane population I was talking about, they have these, subalpine habitat, massive home ranges, and they're living in these really, wilderness areas essentially. And then, down in the valleys, the Sacramento Valley, it's the northern portion of the Central Valley in California, tons of agriculture, lots of people, right? And we have this native red fox population that has very, very close associations to human population density. So some of the research that I did when I first started working in the lab was actually doing this sort of, what are the habitat types that this fox is associated with, right? So grassland habitat, but also areas that are near human population. So if you get out into the, slightly higher elevation grassland habitat where it's like really large swaths of contiguous grassland habitat, you'd think that would be awesome for a valley red fox, but it's just riddled with coyotes. And so we don't have foxes there. They're not out there at all. We put cameras all over the place, and they're just they're sticking close to the people because they know it keeps them safe and it keeps them safe. So definitely with the dens.
What's the conservation like against hunting varmints, let's say like coyotes? Is California pretty highly regulated against that, or?
Yeah, so I think let's see. I'm not super familiar with the coyote regulations. You can trap coyotes. I think there's a season for them, the same with gray foxes. With red foxes, it's a little bit different and also a little bit confusing, right? Because as I mentioned before, we always knew about this native red fox in the mountains, but prior to 2007, it was thought that all red foxes in the lowland Californias were non-native, and that they were brought to California in the early 1900s for fur farming. And then in the 50s, they just let them all go. And so they were sort of treated as a pest up until very recently. So the California regs, like if you ask someone in the state wildlife office, they'll tell you, no, you can't trap without a take permit, right? If they're like a depredation permit, essentially.
Okay.
Read the reg book. It kind of says you can do what you want because so they just
but now with California and the aspect of it is a very liberal state, pardon me, and they've really cracked down in regards to various hunting in the areas. I'm wondering, have they done that with coyotes, and would that have had, and if they are, would that have a direct result in the population growth of the red fox in the valley, let's say?
Yeah. So, I think with regarding sort of the strictness of regulations in California, it is definitely like a very, a very strict state, right? So I know recently they stopped allowing hunting with dogs. You can't use leg hold traps here. So it also makes conservation research very difficult, right? So my advisor, he actually did his master's work with coyotes, and he would love to be able to use a leg hold trap, and it makes the research hard too, because you catch things with box traps. And the postdoc I mentioned, who works with the high elevation population, she tried to do a collaring study and just could not catch these foxes.
Wow.
I think if we get into the discussion of current regulations, based in California comparative to Saskatchewan, Alberta, like we'll end up in a rabbit hole here of a whole mecca.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just super
We specialize in rabbit
holes.
holes.
I know where this pod is going, and we could really light it up here. But in the grand scheme of the things here, we're all focused on the same agenda of what the red fox has done or where it's come from historically. And we can't look at in the last 10 years of market trend or predation or habitats and all of that. It's really, where did the red fox come from in California? And so, I'd love to have this conversation another day, but I don't think today's the day because I'm in a great mood. I'm stuck in a hospital right now, and I'm having the time of my life, guys.
Nice.
So I don't want to get all revved up on something like that. So
Sean's finally in a good mood too.
that's right. So we'll focus on the actual piece of the
let's get back to the study here.
Yeah.
So what's the current situation of your study, Sophie? Where are you at?
Yeah, so we have many tissue samples from throughout the Intermountain West. So we've got, I think at the moment I've got maybe like 300, 400 tissue samples from populations in, the valley of California. So both the native and sort of the non-native red foxes that we have in California. And then, several samples from the Sierra Nevada region, the Rocky Mountains, and the Washington Cascades. And then lots of foxes from sort of the Intermountain region, right? So kind of the Great Basin. And yeah, we've got some really great data, and Kate, who I continue to mention, she's done so much awesome research as well. Just published a paper sort of, so I'd be happy to share that. Well, sorry, it's in review, but I would be happy to share it as soon as it is accepted. And so, yeah, what we're really looking for now is trying to fill in those sampling gaps. So we've got lots of samples from, we were talking about fur farms earlier. We have quite a few fur farms who have sent us samples from their stocks in Newfoundland, and then also a couple in the US. And then we have wild eastern red foxes as well. And then, I've been working with Wrangler, see what we can get for the rest of this season. Also been talking with the Alberta Trappers Association, who's super excited to work with us too. And then I also recently heard from the Trappers Association in Quebec. So that's really cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So, again, we're really trying to get what we can this season, but I know that the trapping season's kind of winding down. And so, also hoping we can kind of continue this collaboration for next season as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So so I'm just trying to formulate my thoughts because my mind is spinning a million miles an hour right now. So you're working with all these different associations to get various samples. How can local trappers get these samples to you? How can we facilitate that?
Yeah, Wrangler, do you want to take that one, or is that helpful?
Sure. So here in Saskatchewan, after discussing with Sophie what we can do here, we thought we got to make it as simple as possible. And so there's some key points to this as well. Like it's not about just getting the samples, because everybody thinks, well, that's no problem, I'll just throw it all in a bag and here you go kind of thing. There is some reasons. We have to have proper documentation, and we also have to have a proper collection. And really the most important thing that we need to talk about is washing your gear before you're handling that fur, before you're handling each sample, because we can't be spreading DNA. You don't want a whole bunch of coyote put on a fox and ship it away and call it good, thumbs up, good job, guys. I want the best samples we can give. It's no different than when we're putting up our fur. We put everything into it. Why don't we do the same for sample collection? So I don't know if we can. Am I able to share my screen, guys? Will that pop up?
By all means, yeah.
Okay, so for everybody here who's tuning in or who's watching the video, it's really simple. I put this all on our website. So you need to go to SaskatchewanTrappers.com. And if you can remember it, go to SaskatchewanTrappers.com/redfox. And so what that's going to take you to, oh, hang on here, sharing screen is this and this and this. Okay, yep. Click that button. I want to go to, hang on.
I know.
Give it a second, will you?
I was going to share my screen, and then I was like, I don't know if I can get it.
You got me all bugged up here. Okay, I'm going to try this again.
What did I do?
Share screen. Click
I always
that.
like to blame it on Sean if things go wrong.
Yeah, it's all my fault.
Just cause. Yeah.
There. How do I get that now, guys? There. Can you see
There we
that?
go. Yep.
I also brought a kit. I brought a kit with me. So
Oh, nice.
Great.
We'll show that in a sec here.
So the cool thing about Saskatchewan is because, like, right now we're like minus 40 Fahrenheit here. It's freaking cold. So we don't have to worry about stuff rotting. You know, the main things we got to watch for is any sort of like contaminants, as well as like fat and things on the product. But we know red fox is very thin skinned. So if you go to saskatchewantrappers.com/red fox, this is the website where you're going to find all your information. You scroll down. If you want to watch this video again, it's going to be right here. You click that button, everything's happy-go-lucky. If you want the documents to find out more about how to get your samples collected, you click this little button here. And as soon as it clicks, it should open up a PDF, which I hope this loads up. Done deal. You're going to print this off if you want to keep it. And we've got the sample instructions. So the main thing we need to remember is the actual cleaning of your tools. Wash them, hot soapy water, you know, new gloves on, all of that stuff. And of course, your animal needs to be good health. We don't want anything sick because, of course, when we're shipping this stuff across the border, we need to make sure they're all healthy specimens. So if it's got mites, if it has mange, if you're worried that it may have distemper, or whoever knows, whatever, rabies, don't keep that one. You're going to toss it. Of course, the sample collection is very small. They're looking for a 1/2 inch by a 1 inch piece of skin. They also had tissue, but I felt skin was the most appropriate because it's very simple to dry and it's very simple to ship. And so for me, when I was starting to collect my samples, I was taking it right at the top of the hind leg. And we all know that this is a piece that we don't ever really use. You could start here on your cuts and it wouldn't make a difference in the market values. So because I'm starting here and I'm taking that collection out, I don't have to worry about my fleshing knife. I don't have to worry about my beam or anything else. I just have to make sure that my knife is clean and sharp and I pull that sample off. And then all you need to do is let it dry. And if it's midwinter right now where it's as dry as it is, put it on a piece of paper. It's going to dry over in a day. Once you get your samples, you're going to just make sure you have them separated so you know which one is which, and you need to fill out your forms accurately. Now you're probably asking, where are the forms? They're on the same document right down here. So just keep rolling down the screen. You're going to keep following your instructions to make sure everything is due diligence. Now, storage is the important thing. If you can't get this piece dried, then I suggest you put it in a bag and put it in your freezer. And that's just going to keep it stored. But we all know if you put it on the table for a day, it's going to come back dry as can be. Get them in separate paper bags or separate envelopes and write on them. And then on that document, just identify which sample is which. Now, I had two different kind of pretend areas. So if you're trapping on southern lands in Saskatchewan, just give a ballpark of the land location, or if you're from a town and it was like 6 miles north along the river, just write that down as the capture location. And that's going to give a better reference. We don't need a GPS location, but a pretty close reference. If you're trapping on a registered block up in the north, put your block and your sub-block number in. That's a pretty good indicator. I don't expect us to get a ton of red fox samples out of the north in the blocks, but at least then we can pinpoint locations to kind of show a good demographic. I don't want 5 samples from a trapper. I only want 2. And that's just so we can spread it across the province so that we have a good variability in our collection. Now, how you're going to get them is there's multiple ways. There is a way you can mail them to me if you really so choose. But I'm gonna tell you a couple other options here as soon as this thing pops back. Has it gone back to the screen? Good. Okay. Yeah. So if you want to mail them, you can mail them to the Saskatchewan Trappers Association. Stuff those 2 envelopes and your paper in the envelope and mail it to me. It's middle of winter. It's not going to hurt them. I'm going to get them. I'll keep the samples. And then Sophie and I will coordinate the next part of it, getting them across to the US and all of that stuff. Done deal. If you want, you can get a hold of Ian Bagheera with Dam Beaver Trapping Supplies. He is also the agent for Fur Harvesters Auction. He agreed to be picking up samples as well if he's on the road or in his shop. Get them to him. You can contact Don and Karen Gordon, and they're working with GFW Canada. They're also KD Ventures Trap Supplies. They agreed as well. They'll pick up collections and they'll get them over together. We'll collaborate. We'll get this stuff shipped across. Or if you catch me and Jason on the road with Two Rivers, We'll be on the road all this season too. Get a hold of us. One of us will be hooking up and doing this. We'll get this stuff together. So you don't have to mail them. You're going to be shipping your fur or selling your fur to somebody. So you might as well just bring them along. What I'm asking you guys is that you don't show up with a goodie bag of stuff all together and say,
well, and that's what I was going to add too. Like, especially in a study like this, where there's such a conglomeration of data, the term garbage in results in garbage results, right?
Exactly.
So you need to have good quality data and not just, like you said, here's a bag full of, crap. It's no, here's two samples that I got with a proper location so that Sophie can take that data, plug it into her algorithms, and she's good to go, right?
That's right. And don't ruin the sample by using a dirty knife or just taking it off an old hide that you had, saying good enough, you use a contaminated product, you're going to get a contaminated sample. And we can't see that right when we pick it up. So we want to make sure that it is the best. And I think most trappers are going to be pretty up to that. So let's just do the best we can on that.
So anybody can contribute then, right? It's just a matter of sending to a central collection, I guess, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So you have the fur buyers, you have the auction house, you've got the trap supply companies, as well as you can contact me directly as the president of the association or any of the directors. And again, you go onto the website, SaskatchewanTrappers.com, you're going to find a contact number for all the directors. There's like 11 or 12 of us, as well as our education coordinator. Get in touch with whoever's closest to you. We will find a way to make this work. If you don't want to spend the $1 on a stamp to mail it to me, we'll make it work.
There's ways around it.
Exactly. And you know what the key here is, that we want consistency in our samples, but we also want to contribute. I don't want to send Sophie my 7 samples and that's it and say sorry.
Yeah, or if you're coming into Costco in Saskatoon, reach out to the First Focal Plane podcast. Kurt will arrange a pickup. Or if you're in Regina, same sort of thing. Reach out to me. Well, there's ways we can do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is a great study, and Sophie's doing great work here. And we have to facilitate this and do our part. So.
And we're just super, super grateful for Saskatchewan Trappers Association's agreeing to act as sort of a hub, because it is, I love interacting with trappers, but if I want to do it in this way, and if it's, me trying to coordinate shipping to and from with 100 different trappers.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, and you technically are dealing with some pretty not volatile pieces, but they're biological samples, right? Which could pose a lot of issues going to and from the border, whether it's the Canada Border Services Agency or U.S. Border Patrol.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough to deal with. So
yeah, so thankfully. Another perk of working with a red fox, it's not a protected species, right? So we don't have to worry about any of the site permits, and then if it was something where we're asking folks to specifically go out and sort of trap something on our behalf, right? Then there are different permits we have to deal with as well, sort of like proper animal care and use permits, and but with this, since trappers are out there trapping these foxes anyways, and we're just taking a small sample of the skin, all we really need is a statement of health that they can get across the border, and that should not be a problem for us. So.
Right on. Okay. Well, what's next? What's the future hold for you, Sophie?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Where do you go from fox?
Where do you go from fox? Yeah. So I sort of, when I started my dissertation, I had all these different ideas. So a PhD dissertation is typically 3 chapters. So it's kind of like 3 different studies, and sometimes they're very related. Like either you have the same system and you have 3 different questions within your system, or you have like one question you're really interested in and you look at that same question in 3 different systems. So there's lots of different ways people do it, and it never ends up the way you plan it.
No.
You start down one path and then you get really excited by something else, and so you deviate. So when I started, I sort of thought most of my stuff was going to be about this Sac Valley red fox population. And specifically, right, thinking back about those fur farms, the non-native foxes in California sort of having this history of fur farming, of the origin of fur farms, right? So they were brought to California for populating fur farms and then let go. And so we have this really interesting situation where, again, back to that question of is a red fox a red fox, and are they all basically the same? Where we have at the southern end of the Sacramento Valley, so you have like the San Francisco Bay Area, right, and then Southern California, and then you have the Sacramento Valley, and these two populations butt right up against one another. But they do interbreed, rarely, occasionally, but we never see a non-native red fox in the Sac Valley proper, and we never see a Sac Valley fox outside of the valley. And these foxes can, they have decent sized home ranges, but specifically they can move a very long way. So when they're dispersing, right? So the pups are born in the spring, and then they typically, more often the males will disperse very long distances looking for mates in their own territories. So we'll have male foxes that disperse almost the entire range of the Sacramento Valley, or the whole population, but they don't go into the non-native area. And it's very different habitat type, right? But so that kind of gets to that question of is it the same? And it doesn't seem like they are. It seems like they're different, and they know that they're different, and they're choosing not to interbreed readily. And so one of the things that I study is sort of exploring the hybridization and that contact zone and what keeps them apart. Is there some sort of barrier, like some sort of olfactory, like some ability for them, olfaction genes are different, or there's reproductive barriers, they have some reproductive incompatibilities potentially from that time they were evolving separately. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at as well. That's super interesting. And then thinking about the history of fur farming, right? Is there something going on with the non-native populations where humans sort of inadvertently changed them? We were talking about before we started this Russian fox farm experiment, right? Where they were able to sort of in very few number of generations, sort of artificial selection, humans are able to breed red foxes to have like floppy ears, and they'll wag their tails like a dog does. They're very tame, very docile. And on the flip side, you can, if take the aggressive pups from the litter and sort of intentionally breed them in a direction, you end up with foxes that are very, very different. And so even though in the fur farms, they're not specifically trying to breed tame or domesticated foxes, are they inadvertently changing the biology of the organism? So they also often breed them to be more polygynous, right? When red foxes are more on the monogamous side than the polygynous side, though that varies a lot depending on the population too. So they're breeding to be more polygynous because it's easier for them to have them mate with who they want for their breeding lines. They're breeding them to be potentially more tame, easier to handle.
You just got to relocate them from the Sierra Nevadas to the Park City, Utah area, and I think it'll just by osmosis they'll become polygamous. Anyway.
Yeah, you got to work with what you got. Hey,
that's right.
I think one important piece here that a lot of the viewers should know is the funding that backs this project, Sophie. This is one of the questions I asked the first time I met her, was because I sit on boards and committees where we fund a lot of projects through the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund and things like that. And sometimes the projects just stall when the money's not coming in. And so that was my first question to her was, well, where is the money, or what kind of funding are we sitting on to do this project?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the answer is very little. So I am fortunate enough that the lab that I work in, my PI has a fondness, as it seems most of us do, for foxes. It's kind of, we work with a lot of different species. And we do have a lot of research projects that are heavily funded. And the foxes have never had a ton of funding. So we have some funding to work with that high elevation population for conservation. And it's a very large collaborative project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, Washington Fish and Wildlife, and then a couple different universities and researchers. And then California Fish and Wildlife has funded some of the valley fox research. But myself personally, I'm not funded, so I teach. So I teach at the university to pay for, my grad school, which is how a lot of graduate programs are. So I'm not saying that's unique for me, but I do that.
Pretty dedicated, though. You got to admit that.
It's been tough this year with Zoom. The virtual teaching is a whole other beast for sure. And then we just kind of make it work. So we're fortunate enough that we have a really wonderful lab space, and we have a genome center at the university. So we get the sequencing costs at a slightly discounted rate. It's very, very expensive if you send your samples out somewhere, right, to be prepped and sequenced. But if you can do it all in-house, it's a lot more affordable. And so I do all the library preparations myself and extract the DNA, all the QC. And so it's definitely not free. But
you must have a wild social life.
Yeah.
Hey, come on over to the lab.
I think the important thing to take home is that, the trappers are dedicated to what they do. We're out there doing it day after day. We love what we do. We have just a passion for the outdoors and for the wildlife, and we take pride in what we do. And it's, to see the passion coming through on the next level within research is just as much of a driver for me to say, let's make this happen, because it's
no kidding.
Not every day you see that, people that are just plugging those hours in one after another. And I don't want to say for nothing, but you're not getting other than what the return is, right? You're not making a paycheck sitting there 8 to 5. You're doing it because you love to do it and you want to see what the next level is. So that for me is what the push is. And I think a lot of trappers are going to start recognizing that too. We want to make this happen. We want to get the best results we can. Yeah.
And honestly, I sometimes wonder if I'll ever leave the red fox world behind me, because I'm already talking with my advisor saying like, oh, well, like, this isn't part of my PhD, but like maybe I can do a postdoc project on this kind of red foxes. Let's bring Alaska in and Quebec, and like let's do co-color stuff. Like,
that would be pretty cool.
We've done multiple projects in the past with the association, with University of Saskatchewan and other things. And some of them have provided a financial kickback to the trappers, because sometimes it was carcass submissions and, it was a process and there was administrative tasks and whatever else. But, this is such a simple procedure to do. I can't see why no one in the ability of putting up a red fox can simply set it on a piece of paper, fill out the form, and stuff it in an envelope. It's very, very simple,
Yeah.
So this is awesome, and I love this. And the more we can engage with stakeholders, whether they're from Saskatchewan or from Canada or North America or the world, it just gives us a better spotlight of what trapping and trappers are all about. We want to exceed. We want the habitat to be there and the wildlife. So
what sort of buy-in have you seen, Wrangler, from the trappers around Saskatchewan then?
When I talked about this project?
Yeah.
People are interested about it. And I think doing this podcast, this chat on tonight is really the driver to give these people the ability to turn about it and think about it and go, yeah, this means something. It's the more stuff you put on paper over and over and over again, they just wash it away. But trappers are always genuinely interested.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's how much time does it take to do it? None of us are getting paid to do it. So if we can make it as easy as possible, I can't see this being a problem. And it's not even, it's the logistics now. So like they don't even have to go anywhere. If they got to sell their fur, they're going to sell it and drop it off the auction. They're going to kick it off the door right there.
Yeah.
Deal. So, and the red fox numbers are high right now. It's even better. So that's good. So I'm hopeful. We'll have at least 100 samples or more. And I hope the trappers prove me wrong. I hope it's even higher.
Good.
Yeah.
What is the goal for samples, Sophie?
Yeah, so I think that 200 would be stellar. I think that given how late sort of into the trapping season we started, and I know that, a lot of trappers were already out and in the field. And so it's tough to get the word out at that point. So I think if, even if we can get 7 or 50, we'll take it and we'll kind of run with it for next year too, and just sort of use it as a starting point for moving forward. But yeah, I think, 200 would sort of spread across Saskatchewan would give a really beautiful picture and add a lot to the story. So
Yeah.
When did you guys start this initiative then? How long has it been in play?
You're talking about just here in Saskatchewan?
Just here in Saskatchewan, yeah.
Month?
Oh, is that right? Oh, just baby fresh.
We got it going. With the season being kind of right in the middle of it all, we just have to do it. And the only way to do it is to get it out there. And so we thought, let's turn the switch. Let's get moving. This was a project, like the video feed and all of it. This was part of it that we kind of dreamed up as we were going, thinking great opportunity here. And guys, like, and all of you listeners right now, I got to give these guys credit. You can see I'm in a hospital. I'm stuck in a hospital right now.
No, don't frame it like that.
You're not stuck, but you do work there, which is funny.
Right.
But you're not there for work.
It's not because I'm either, but I didn't have the ability to get this process working. I wanted to get the same video feed rolling and all that. And in a panic or in a pinch, I talked to Sean and he's like, hey, we could do this. Why don't we just get up and get going?
Great.
Kudos, guys. Like, thanks a lot for doing it.
No
This
problem,
is it's allowed us to reach out to everybody, and all the viewers out there are going to say the same thing. Like, this is great. This is what we need. And so the cool thing about this study that I'm really looking forward to is after we get these samples sent off and Sophie gets them and she runs the data on them and all of that, we're going to bring it back. We're going to bring it back to the trappers and to the public, and we're going to show them what we found, what the data is showing, and what we're thinking about for next year. And I'm not saying I'm thinking, because it's not my project. I'm just the middleman. I'm the mule between all of it here. But I want this to exceed what we need for studies. And if we can continue contributing, we're going to, because that's what trappers want to see. So great project. I'm thrilled about this.
Yeah. And we're also, if anybody has any questions or, things that they've observed that they're super interested in, I definitely can't guarantee that the data would be able to answer those, but we want to hear about that, right? Like, we want to do research that's sort of informed by people's curiosity and sort of the things people are observing on the landscape. And I've never been to Saskatchewan. I don't know what it's like up there. So,
well, don't come right now.
If you're working at 65 degrees, you better not show up. It's not that at all.
Yeah, I was also going to say that, just sort of touching on the fact that we're later into the trapping season, and I know that, furs are getting sold sort of periodically throughout the season, but the drying of the skins, right, is what sort of preserves the DNA, and it does it very well. And the way that trappers do put skins on a board and dry them, it's perfect. And essentially how they're going to be sent back to me is in a little baggie. This is actually in a little baggie that has desiccant beads on it. And so, that's just to dry it out, but it's already effectively going to be very dried. And so if you have a skin that maybe has already been dried that you still have, it doesn't have to be a fresh carcass that you're sampling from. It could be from that dried carcass, that dried skin already, and that would be totally fine too. So,
would you consider then, Sophie, to cut the perimeter of that skin out that may have been handled with a tool that might have been dirty at one time? Because we'll be honest, we don't wash our knives between animals. It's
right. Yeah. So I think that probably in the lab we could. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I'd say that the bulk of the DNA is going to be from that individual. And if I knew whether or not it was collected cleanly, I could take extra care in the lab to like take an internal piece and try to sort of scrape the exterior off. But I guess that's a good point, without knowing whether it was sampled cleanly or potentially contaminated. It's just there's a lot of.
Let's try and mitigate that problem by having, if you're going to submit the sample, clean your tools, right? That's the easiest, right?
But honestly, so I'll also say that we've gone to fur auctions and sampled foxes from fur auctions in the past. That data has always worked really great for us. So yes, I think there are best practices, and then there are
yeah. It'll get it done in practice.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have to ask, all the data that you'll be going through for the samples that you receive from Saskatchewan, or any other region, honestly, when would you expect to have those complete? And what I'm thinking of is having you guys back on again at some point in the future to kind of go over the results, your findings, and all that kind of stuff with us.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I know. I thought about it all by myself.
So I would say that, within receiving the samples, a couple of months to sort of track the DNA, QC it, get it in a place where it would be prepared for sequencing, and then sending it to the sequencer. There are lots of different ways to look at the data. And so lots of different tools that you can do, some of which are pretty quick and some of which take a bit longer. But this isn't sort of starting a study from scratch. This is sort of filling in the holes where we have holes and make it make more sense. And so thankfully I do already have, the pipeline for kind of moving through both the lab work as well as the analysis. And so I think the limiting factor would really just be that I also have 3 other projects going on at the same time, and
you're not getting paid for this, so that's another aspect. But anyway, it is what it is. Well,
like realistically, if I'm just thinking about the person hours, I could do it in 3 weeks if it was just that.
I was just thinking maybe we could have a bit of a preseason primer this year, September or October or something like that. Bring back the results and have another show.
That would be awesome, and that would also be like a great sort of, hey, look at how useful and valuable this is for us. Let's get more.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'd love
one of the strategies that we're looking at as well, because COVID has really buggered up the ability to gather. We have an association have always hosted a convention every year, which we've always brought in, presentations from studies that they're doing and whatever. And it's flopped. Like, we just can't do it. And it's not even worth trying for the 10 or 20 or 30 people that they so-called allow in a building. And it's also the safety of everybody who's in that building. Not to mention Sophie's not going to fly all the way up here to come to attend for this as well. You never know.
What time of year is this?
Yeah, that's good. We can facilitate this ability. We can still host events like this. And the fact that people can tune in, it's great. So if we want to do one in the late fall or the late fall, early winter, that'd be perfect timing. I'd get people revved right up for the next season. We know what's going to be coming down the pipe. I love it.
Right on.
Let's be happy to have you.
Yeah, let's touch base when we get the results, and we'll see what we can come up with. So perfect. Well, I think we're at that hour mark, so I think we've done you guys a service here. Thank Wrangler. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. This is just fascinating to me. So when you guys were talking, I just tried to keep my mouth shut. I didn't want to ask too many questions, but anyway, cool. So what's that, Kurt?
Now I know where Connor gets all his excitability from.
That's right. I was like, Sean, this is not the discussion for this. Anyway. We're right on, guys. Well, we're not going to plug ourselves too hard here. If you want to check them out, sasktrappers.com. right?
SaskatchewanTrappers.com.
SaskatchewanTrappers.com/Red Fox.
You got it.
That's where you're going to get the info here. I shared it in the comments down below. Also, Sophie, where can people find you at and your study outside of that?
So you can find the research lab that I work for if you type in the MECU UC Davis. So it's an acronym for Mammalian Ecology and Conservation Unit. And I can share, is that what
MECU.
Yeah, MECU.
Okay, say that again. I'm typing it out. The MECU.
The MECU.
Yeah.
UC Davis, and it should come up. It's mecu.ucdavis.edu is the website.
Okay, there we go. mecu.ucdavis.edu. There we go. So I just put that in the comments. So there you go. Awesome.
Excellent.
And as always, guys, you can find us ffpp.ca and Facebook's, Instagram, all that stuff. So cool. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
We're not as exciting as Red Fox, but we're up there.
That's right.
I was going to make a comment about the red-green. That's what I was thinking.
Keep your sticks on the ice.
That's right. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Bye, guys.
Bye.